In today's video, we're taking a look at the latest trade talk around the NHL leading up to the NHL trade deadline. Could we see a major blockbuster deal between the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Calgary Flames? We'll discuss the possibilities around that. We also have some updated trade rumors regarding teams like the Philadelphia Flyers and the Columbus Blue Jackets. We also got news today that there's another lawsuit against the NHL and the Canadian Junior Hockey Leagues, which state that they violate U.S. antitrust laws. We'll discuss the impacts from that. More news from the waiver wire, more news from the NHL Department of Player Safety, including the NHLPA appealing the suspension of Leafs defenseman Morgan Rielly. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot to cover here tonight. Lots of news, some trade rumors, and like I said, a new lawsuit that's come up in the world of hockey as well. We'll discuss all that here over the next little bit. First up, let's start with news from the NHL waiver wire. We did have a few players on waivers yesterday. Everybody that was on waivers did in fact clear. There were no claims, but we do have a new player on waivers today, and that's Chicago Blackhawks forward Rem Pitlick. That's the second for 2 days in a row that a player named Pitlick is on waivers. Of course, Tyler Pitlick was just on waivers with the Rangers and cleared, and now Pitlick is Rem is next up here. So clearly, Rem Pitlick's a good player. I'm surprised. I know when he was in Minnesota, went to Montreal on waivers, had a decent run there for a while, but then kind of fell out of favor, ended up on waivers and has bounced around a bit more. Clearly, I don't know. He's got good speed, and we'll see if he gets picked up or if not. I mean, really, I think the Blackhawks are probably one of the teams that probably they've done more waiver business than probably anybody else here lately. So I'm going to say he's probably going to clear. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see what the future holds for Rem Pitlick, because it doesn't appear as though he's going to be able to stick and have a full-time spot in Chicago. A couple updates from the Department of NHL Player Safety and regarding some recent business here. The new business is Bruins goalie Linus Ullmark has been fined $5,000 for a high sticking incident that happened in last night's game against Tampa Bay Lightning forward Mikey Eyssimont. Essentially, Eyssimont was in the crease, kind of crashed, and there was some contact with Ullmark, but as Ullmark went to the ice, he came kind of back down and chopped with his goal stick to hit the Lightning player. Didn't seem like it was all that really bad, but enough to generate a fine from player safety. The other big news regarding player safety comes from the NHLPA today, which isn't a huge surprise. We've seen this a fair bit lately, but the NHLPA has announced that they have filed an appeal on behalf of Morgan Rielly for the Maple Leafs defenseman's 5-game suspension that just was handed down yesterday from George Peros in the Department of Player Safety. So because of the rules here in place, and I kind of wonder if some of these like the rules for appeals might be having an impact on the decisions for how many games to hand out. We have heard word from NHL insiders lately saying that the Department of Player Safety had concerns with the number of suspensions that have been appealed lately. Now, keep in mind, we haven't really seen much in the way of suspensions being altered. Now, if it's 5 games or less, it goes to Commissioner Gary Bettman. He's the only one who will review the appeal, and he will make a final decision that either is being upheld or he can lessen it if he feels it's justified. Essentially, he has to look at things objectively and take a look at the evidence that player safety used to come to their decisions and see if he agrees with it. Generally speaking, historically, he has agreed with them. So I don't think we'll see a change, but it is possible. I guess you never know. They're probably looking at it as it's worth a try. And if it was over 5 games, if it was 1 game or more longer, then there would be 2 appeal processes. The first one goes to Gary Bettman, and then if he does not make any changes and they wish to pursue it further, they could then go to a third-party arbitrator who would review the case, and they're the ones we've seen a little bit more change with, like some long-term ones that were like the bigger ones we've seen in the last 5-10 years, like the Tom Wilson 20-game one, the Dennis Weidman one, from all those years back. Look, they've been the ones that arbitrators have been lowering things. So I do wonder if that factors into their decision, saying, okay, well, we know Bettman's probably going to back us on this. So if we only go 5, if they do appeal, it's probably not going to get changed. I don't know. I mean, it really shouldn't go into their decisions. but part of me does wonder if it does. And as much as, I don't have any issues with the 5 games they gave to Rielly, my big issue with player safety is the lack of consistency. I know some people call it kangaroo court. It's just like you never know what you're going to get from them. Sometimes you think it's going to be 2-3 game suspension. Sometimes it ends up being a fine. Other times you think, oh geez, it's going to be real bad. He's going to get 5 or 6. It ends up being 1 or 2. Like it's really, really challenging and difficult, almost impossible to look at a play that happens in real time and be like, oh, that's going to generate a suspension of X number of games. You almost can never get it right. So it's, we'll see what happens here. But Rielly's appeal has been officially filed, and Bettman is expected to, or supposed to review these things in a timely manner. Hopefully that way, if there are any changes are made, that it's before the 5 games are served. Because ultimately, the salary that is forfeited by the player, he can get the money back if the appeal does change after the fact, but you can't get those games back once they're lost. Some other roster moves and injury updates for you as well. The San Jose Sharks today announced they've activated defenseman Mario Ferraro and forward Mikael Granlund, so they'll be back in action. The Maple Leafs, on top of dealing with the Rielly suspension, were without Mitch Marner and John Tavares last night due to being out sick. There seems to be a flu bug going around the room, and now William Nylander has it as well. The Leafs don't play tonight, but they do play tomorrow, so it's not clear yet if Marner and Tavares will be better enough to play tomorrow night or not. If they are still quite ill, and Nylander's out as well, and then Rielly's out, that's a lot of bodies out of the lineup. It's certainly going to make things challenging, but they did manage to win last night without those 3 players against the St. Louis Blues, and had a pretty good game off a hat trick from Bobby McMahon. It was actually the first time in NHL history last night that, if I'm not mistaken, I'm going to see if I get this correct, but it's the first time we've seen 5 Canadian teams all win on the same night by multiple goals. So it's not something that you see very often. The Vegas Golden Knights today had defenseman Shea Theodore on the ice in a regular contact jersey. So that's great news. He's been out for an extended time. Theodore's a huge part of that team. If the Golden Knights are going to be able to get healthy here, and obviously hope to get Eichel back soon as well, that's certainly going to pose trouble for the other Western Conference teams. But Theodore's return to the ice is a welcome addition and a big deal for them. The Calgary Flames did lose young player Jacob Peltier again. Appeared to suffer another shoulder injury, the same shoulder that he had surgically repaired. Right now they're calling it day-to-day, but I do have concerns based on watching the play and the reaction to it that it could be worse. Maybe they're saying day to day because they're waiting for things to settle down. Sometimes with an injury, it takes a couple days before you really know the full extent. Sometimes you get away for like swelling and inflammation and things to kind of die down before you can get a true picture of what you're dealing with. So hopefully it's not real serious and he'll only be out a short time, but certainly some concern for the young man who's already had a lot of issues with that shoulder. In the Flyers, we got news that Rasmus Ristolainen, who's been a big topic around NHL trade deadline pickups, probably is not going to be traded now because he's going to be out of action for approximately a month, and it could be longer. So it sounds like from what we're hearing is that the injury is going to be it's going to be a couple of weeks, and then he's going to have a procedure, and then depending on how that goes, it could be out longer. It's something to that effect. We don't really know exactly what the injury is, but it's going to be about a month, maybe more, that he's going to be out. So considering the trade deadline is now, we're within that 3-week range, I just don't see that being the case. Players are not likely going to be traded when they're injured and going to be missing, potentially even a couple of weeks past the deadline. It's probably not worth it, especially on, somebody you're going to want to be a big part of your decor. So there had been some speculation they could retain some salary and move Ristolainen, which would allow them to possibly keep Sean Walker. So that seems pretty unlikely now. I know with the Flyers deadline moves, there were some updates regarding their trade situation regarding from Anthony DeMarco of the fourthperiod.com, where he had a lot of different updates today saying essentially that Ristolainen not going to be traded now, very unlikely, which will likely increase the fact that Sean Walker is probably going to be back to being more likely to be dealt, because they know that long term they may not be able to sign Walker between the Ristolainen contract, the fact they picked up Jamie Drysdale. It just seems unlikely that Walker would have a good long-term spot there. So they may decide to keep him as their own rental, because they are trending towards having a shot at playoffs here. But I think Danny Briere will do what's best for the team. And if he can get a high pick or a good prospect out of Walker in a trade, then I really think he'll pull the trigger regardless of where they're at in the standings. But that'll certainly, like I said, put the emphasis back on Walker, maybe Sealer as potential trade pieces out of the Flyers decor and not Ristolainen. He also made mention of Morgan Frost, who's been a subject of trade rumors as well in the last couple of months, really. Even actually dating back to the offseason, to be accurate. It's been off and on. Frost at times has not seemed to have the greatest relationship with Tortorella. Doesn't seem to be a player that he's super fond of, but lately he's been doing a lot better, playing a lot well. And well, the belief is that with the way he's played lately, that maybe he's turned a corner, and they don't really want to move him down, because they see, if they can continue to get what they've been getting lately, that they really like this guy. So it seems less likely that Morgan Frost gets dealt. Scott Lawton is still a possibility for the Flyers to move. It's going to boil down to what teams are willing to give up. I think conversations are definitely going to be had with a thin market around certain types of players, especially guys who can play down the middle. There certainly would be a market for him, but it's going to boil down to that. I know Travis Konecny's name has been out there off and on as well, but it's believed at this point that likely this summer the Flyers and Konechny are probably going to be doing a long-term deal, and he's likely going to stay, probably be their next captain. At least that's the way things are looking at the moment. Phil Kessel has landed in BC. He has joined the Canucks at their AHL facility in Abbotsford, and is going to be skating with the team. He started doing so already today. There's already video of him out there taking part in practice and skating, doing drills, etc. So the plan here is that he's going to come, spend some time. I'm not sure exact time frame, but clearly he'll skate and see how things go. If the Canucks are impressed enough and think they have a role for him, they'll probably sign him to a contract for the rest of the season. If not, they could end up parting ways mutually if they don't think it's going to work out. But the early assessment from those reporters who did see Phil today was that basically you could tell that he's an aging veteran that's been out of the game a while, which really, I don't care who you are. I know Phil Kessel gets a lot of flack for his conditioning and his diet and all those types of things. He's not really your traditional hardcore elite athlete who looks after himself the way that guys like McKinnon and Crosby and those guys do. That's just not how Phil rolls. I think everybody who knows Kessel and been enough of his history knows that. But he sometimes does get a lot of flack for how he looks after himself or lack thereof. But at the same time, even guys that are in tip-top shape, like, it's hard when you've been away from the game for 8-9 months or whatever it's been now. So we'll see how things go. I'm sure they're probably going to give him a couple of weeks to keep up and see where things go. But like Phil Kessel, still has a wicked shot. He's got lots of experience. Is he a bottom six forward, though? Because, I think with the Canucks, that's probably what he would be. But you could make an argument that you could probably fill him in just about anywhere. So I think there could be a potential with just about every line where you could see how he might fit. The problem is, like I said, Kessel's not at this rate and of his age. He's not going to be, an elite skater. He's not going to be strong defensively. He never really was. He's more of a opportunistic scorer. So to me, he's a complimentary player. To me, ideally, you kind of want him on your third line. And maybe on your second power play unit. That's probably where Kessel fits. But obviously, Rick Tocchet's known as the Kessel Whisperer. He seems to be the coach that's been able to bring the most out of him and keep him happy the most. And if anybody can do it, it's them. So not surprising at all that he's out there. And we'll see if it works out, and we'll monitor the situation moving forward. Now, some other trade rumors as well regarding Columbus. I know one name that's been out there a lot, and it's really not so much out there because of reporters saying that they thought he was going to be dealt, but Boone Jenner's name has gotten a lot of attention. I know Elliot Friedman's brought him up on his podcast a few times, basically saying that because of the lack of center depth on the trade market for pending UFAs and rental market, that players like Jenner are getting more and more attention. He's a hard-nosed center who can play a two-way game, got a little bit of offense in his game, got a little bit of snarl, a little bit of grit. I can understand why teams would like him, especially, in Columbus, he plays a bigger role than he would on a lot of teams. A lot of other teams, he might be more of a third-line player, but still, on a cup-contending team, that makes sense, and he could be a good fit. But according to Aaron Portzline and Columbus reporters, they're saying that right now that Jenner does not want to be moved. He was asked about it, expressed his desire to stay and see out his contract in Columbus, and it's believed that the team, including ownership, really, really like this guy. He's their captain, and they don't really have the desire to move him. So unless they get an offer that just blows them away, there's pretty much no chance that Boone Jenner is going to get moved out of Columbus at this year's deadline. Now, another thing as well, before we get into the Blockbuster deal I want to discuss between the Leafs and the Flames, is there was news today, which is fairly big news, about a lawsuit that's been filed in the United States against the NHL is one of the defendants, but it's also against junior hockey in North America, predominantly the CHL, which obviously is the league that oversees the Western Hockey League, the Ontario Hockey League, and the Quebec Maritime Junior Hockey League. So the three leagues that obviously go across Canada. Now, in the United States, they have several teams, a part of those leagues that are actually based in the U.S., but play in the Canadian Junior Hockey League. So, obviously, this is why this is filed where it was. Essentially, the lawsuit's main premise says that the CHL violates U.S. antitrust laws. A couple of things suggesting that, for example, even though there's three leagues across the country, and of course, counting the teams in the U.S., for example, the teams that are in the United States, depending on what state they're in, dictates what league they're in. So they're kind of disputing the geographical fact of that you can't really pick and choose where you want to play, that it's all based on your address, basically, right? So if you're an Ontario kid, you play in the OHL. You don't have the option to see, maybe you think a team that's a better fit for you in the WHL or in the Quebec League. You don't have that option. So things like that. Also talking about the fact that basically that there's no union for these players. They get drafted, and these teams have their rights for their entire junior career. Don't really have a say where they're going. Obviously, it talks about the fact that they're illegally underpaid according to some laws. So, I know there's been a big dispute over that too. We've seen that come up in the NCAA. You could also compare this to the movement we've seen involving minor league baseball players. So essentially, they're hoping that this lawsuit would kind of push probably for more collective bargaining, different compensation and more freedom of choice. So we'll see. This could have a big impact on how things are determined in junior hockey across North America. So certainly it's a very early stages. It's hard to say. This lawsuit may not go anywheres, and it could drag on for several years. So we'll have to see, where this goes. It's going to be a story that we likely end up following and get updates on from time to time over the next several months. Now, as I mentioned, the Blockbuster deal I want to propose and talk about is between the Leafs and the Flames. Now, this is not a deal from NHL insiders that are saying are being discussed and could actually happen here in the short term before the deadline. This Blockbuster trade idea comes from Frank Zervalli of dailyfaceoff.com. Of course, today is February the 14th. It's Valentine's Day. So he put out some reports, essentially an article talking about love and matchmaking and trying to find a match, if you will, for some of the top trade bait players across the league that are expected to be moved by the NHL trade deadline, especially, pending UFA players tend to get the most attention at deadline time. So Noah Hanifin, arguably being probably one of the top 2 or 3 players available, are expected to be available. And from what he is on the market, unsigned, has had several contract extension offers from the Flames, has not signed at this point, and is very likely to be traded sometime between now and the deadline. So this deal between the Flames and the Leafs would go down as follows. I just want to discuss it as a premise, see what you guys think. And if you're Calgary, if you're Toronto, do you execute this deal? So essentially, the Toronto Maple Leafs would acquire from the Calgary Flames defenseman Noah Hanifin with a contract extension in place. Hanifin is obviously, rumored to maybe want to play closer to home in the Boston area. There's been a connection to the Bruins as well. Obviously, he's a player they've had interest in a long time. Toronto's not Boston, but it is a lot closer to Boston than Calgary. Would he want to sign? Obviously, he knows the GM very well from his time in Calgary. Could there be a fit there? The extension would be believed to be somewhere in what Calgary had offered, somewhere around 7-8 years, around $60 million. So you're looking at around that, high 7 mark, probably between $7.5-8 million a year. So there would be that. He would be a good, obviously puck-moving defenseman that can add a lot of offense from their back end, obviously similar to a Morgan Rielly. So Hanifin would come with an extension. They'd also get forward Andrew Mangiapane, who's on an expiring contract. They would retain 50% of Mangiapane's contract. Mangiapane could certainly strengthen their middle six, add some more depth scoring, which has been a bit of an issue at times this year. And, whether or not he stays on a longer-term basis is difficult to say. But based on how his production has gone in Calgary the past couple of years, or shorter-term deals, I'm not sure that Calgary has a long-term future with him there. I think there's a good odds that Mangiapane would be dealt either at the deadline or in the summertime, and probably has a new team to start off next season at the very least. So Hanifin with an extension and Mangiapane with half their salary retained going to Toronto. In exchange, the Leafs would have to send to Calgary a couple of things here, as well as some picks. They'd give up a first-round pick, a third-round pick, and a 5th-round pick. So 3 draft picks in the upcoming draft, or you could even spread those out over a year or two, along with Ryan Reeves, Nick Robertson, and prospect Topi Niemela. So the Flames get a good prospect and 3 draft picks, a good young player who would get more of an opportunity there than he has in Toronto on a consistent basis. And they bring in Ryan Reeves, who certainly looks like a mistake signing by the Leafs, a contract they'd probably like to move. He does not have trade protection. And in Calgary, where they're going with a youth movement and retooling, he could be a good player to maybe help, just add a little bit more physicality and offer some protection to their young players that are looking for more opportunities. I mean, clearly he hasn't really brought that in Toronto. I think that in retrospect, that signing's not looking great. And I think the Leafs, if they get an opportunity to move on, probably would take it. From a cap perspective, this may not work well, because clearly the Leafs are going to be in tough to fit in. Hanifin, now the Flames might have to retain on Hanifin as well, because the article specifies 50% retention, but I believe Frank was just indicating on Mangiapane, not on both. But if they did both, it would certainly make things a lot easier. If they retain half those salaries, Hanifin signs an extension, they give up Robertson, Reeves, and 3 picks and Niemela. That's a pretty good haul for Craig Conroy and the Calgary Flames. I'm not sure they're going to do a whole lot better than that in any other deal. For Toronto, they obviously need help on the blue line, and Hanifin's the top blue liner available at this year's deadline. There's no doubt about that. They get some depth scoring from Mangiapane, who could be a good fit long-term as well. Trey Living gets to pick up a couple of players he's very familiar with. Obviously had a big trade to bring Hanifin to Calgary a few years back, and obviously, very much involved with the drafting and development of Mangiapane. So I personally like this deal a lot for Toronto. From a cap perspective, it'd be tricky, but should be able to be done. They kind of tackle multiple options with one deal. They give up, Robertson's already been believed to be on the market to facilitate something like this. They give up more draft capital. But this is a deal that I think would really strengthen things for Toronto. I really like this deal. Now, can Calgary get a better return for these guys is the question. I'm not sure. I kind of like this trade for both sides, but I'd like to know what everybody thinks. Is this a deal that the matchmaker, Frank Saravalli, can kind of will into happening here? Do you think this is something both these teams should pursue? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.